Electric vehicle requirements remain a hot topic in both auto and energy circles. In 2022, the Biden administration announced new fuel economy standards, which would require automakers to produce cars and trucks with an average fuel economy of 55 miles per gallon by the year 2026. Earlier this month, the New York Times reported they may soon loosen those future standards under pressure from automakers, dealers, labor unions, and politicians like North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer, who is part of a letter written to President Biden calling to undo that future mandate. EV sales in the U.S. did hit a record last year, topping 1 million cars and trucks for the first time, making up 7.6% of the market, up from 5.9% in 2022, according to Kelley Blue Book estimates. And EV production has picked up in recent years, including in a part of the country which you probably wouldn't consider to be big fans of electric vehicles. Rafael Romo reports.
In a sprawling state-of-the-art facility in rural Georgia, the future is taking shape.
I think it's actually quite amazing how the electrification has really accelerated.
Welcome to Kia, Georgia, a 2,200-acre plant that's transforming to soon be able to mass produce an all-electric SUV called EV9.
And there's a 200 million expansion.
Hyundai has also announced plans to mass produce electric cars in the southern state. And in early March, Rivian is scheduled to unveil an all-electric SUV that will be made in Georgia. This project here at Kia is one of dozens already in progress here in Georgia. According to state officials, since 2020, there have been more than 45 different e-mobility projects, creating investments of more than $25 billion in the state. Georgia has enticed car makers with tax incentives and infrastructure upgrades worth billions of dollars, all part of an ambitious plan by Governor Brian Kemp.
We could be the e-mobility leader in the country right here in Georgia.
Some may find it puzzling that a Republican-led state is so focused on green technology, especially given that their party's leader is against it. Former President Donald Trump has pledged to put the brakes on electric vehicles, calling them a hoax on Truth Social and saying they will put automakers out of business.
People like electric vehicles, they're going to buy one. They don't have to buy one. That's the way I think. This is America. You can do what you want to.
We needed to learn to speak Republican.
Promoting green technology makes total sense to Tim Echols, the vice chairman of the Georgia Public Service Commission, who describes himself as both super conservative and a believer of green technology. He says not only Georgia, but red states across the South, including Alabama, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Tennessee, are all jumping on the green energy bandwagon.
Meanwhile, at the national level, the auto industry has announced more than $120 billion in electric car investments, creating more than 100,000 American jobs since the year 2015.